Donald Trump woke up to catastrophic news this morning. U.S. consumer sentiment officially fell to its lowest level ever recorded in data going back to 1952. Additional data has emerged about the MQ-9 Reapers that Iran destroyed during this catastrophic and unlawful war. Over 24 MQ-9 Reaper drones have been destroyed. Donald Trump's blockade is falling apart. The IRGC Navy says that 35 ships, including oil tankers, container ships, and other commercial vessels safely passed through the Strait of Hormuz in the past 24 hours under the strict coordination and security escort of Iran. We can see that as well on the radar tracking data. We're also seeing how lots of foreign diplomats calling out the United States for not having any person involved in these purported discussions with Iran who knows a thing about nuclear material enrichment, anything that would be relevant to the ongoing discussions. And so with all of this bad news piling up, Donald Trump initially tries distraction. So he starts to make his post this morning attacking Stephen Colbert. He posts, "Colbert is finally finished at CBS. Amazing that he lasts so long. No talent, no ratings, no life. He was like a dead person." He posts again, "Stephen Colbert's firing from CBS was the beginning of the end of untalented, nasty, highly overpaid, not funny, and very poorly rated late night television hosts." He then talks about his $1.8 billion slush fund that he wants to give to January 6th insurrectionists while giving himself immunity from any future IRS audit, giving himself full immunity for any tax fraud or tax evasion he may have committed. He posts, "I gave up a lot of money in allowing the just announced anti-weaponization fund to go forward. I could have settled my case, including the illegal release of my tax returns and equally illegal break-in at Mar-a-Lago for an absolute fortune." No, you couldn't. You didn't have a cause of action. The claims were time-barred under the statute of limitations. There is no claim that you would have at most. Maybe one could argue if there was not a statute of limitations issue, the full statutory damages may have been $1,000, but you wouldn't have been awarded anything. 450,000 other people were part of the same data breach that your government did in 2019 when you were in office. It was an IRS contractor who was hired by your administration that you brought a lawsuit against in January 2026. Nobody's buying this, Donald. And so as the news kept on getting worse and worse and worse this morning, we learned more about the blockade not being effective. What does Donald Trump do? Stock market manipulation time. And he sends a signal. He makes his post this morning, "New stock market record," exclamation point, and then the wheels go into motion. After he posts that, Barack Ravid at Axios, he posts the following message. "The commander of the Pakistani Army, Field Marshal Asim Munir, is traveling to Tehran in an effort to reach a deal between Iran and the U.S. on ending the war, a Pakistani security source told me." So then people said, "Oh, we're getting closer to a deal." Barack Ravid posted, "In my opinion, that signals to the market, you know what to do." Donald Trump sends the message, stock market hits a record. Barack Ravid posts. Then we get other news that trickles out. According to Reuters, citing people familiar with the matter, in coordination with the U.S., a Qatari delegation arrived in Tehran earlier today to aid in efforts to realize a deal between the U.S. and Iran. So they're bringing out all the stops right now because that consumer confidence report was absolutely terrible. It said that Americans expect by the end of this year inflation to be at 4.8%. By the way, I think that is a fairly conservative estimate. I've given you my perspective starting at the beginning of this year. I said, I believe it will be 5%. If month over month, we're seeing 0.3 to 0.6% increases, that gets you to 5% pretty quickly. So then the market responds to these stories that leak. while the American people, as evidenced by consumer confidence, feel worse about the economy right now than they did during the 1973 oil crisis. They feel worse right now than they did during the dot-com crash. They feel worse right now than they did during inflation shocks of the 1980s or the Great Recession in the mid-2000s. Guess what? The stock market roars and soars. People suffer. The rich get richer. And then Donald Trump holds a press conference. Do you see how this is all coordinated? Do you see what's going on when you put the pieces of this puzzle together? He then brings in Kevin Warsh, his new Fed chairman. And what does Donald Trump do standing next to him? He goes, the stock market is hot. I just looked it up. It's going up. 50,702. Now we know that Donald Trump, do you see how this is all connected? Donald Trump during the first quarter made over 3,700 stock trades, a new stock trade every 9 minutes of companies that he invites to the White House with CEOs that he travels with. And here's what he does with Kevin Warsh, the new chairman of the Federal Reserve: corruption in plain view. Play this clip.
Just turned on the television. I want to see how the stock market's doing today. Stock market's up 600 points. That means they like you. If they didn't like you, it's actually up to 50,702. So that's as of about 12 minutes ago. Now, who knows? But I think it can only go up. I think with you, it's only going to go up. That was a number that nobody thought was reachable during my entire 4 years.
And then he signals to the market more fraud, more false information, and he just starts making things up. I brought in 18 trillion in 11 months. We haven't got the other data yet for the 12th month. Why wouldn't we have gotten the other data yet, though? Explain that to me. The first year has passed, so we would have got that data, and you didn't bring in $18 trillion. You're making all of this up. Our deficit continues to grow. Our debt continues to rise, while foreign governments are increasingly dumping their holdings in United States treasuries. Countries are moving away from the dollar, and we're seeing a historical reordering and reshaping of a global world order while Donald Trump just makes things up. Let's play this clip.
Done. And the number I like the best is we have $18 trillion being invested in the United States for 11 months, not 12. We haven't gotten the results from 12 yet. We're pretty new. But in 11 months, we have $18 trillion being invested, with a T, being invested in the United States. And the record was $3 trillion many years ago by a different country that I actually just left.
There's a big meeting involving NATO today in Sweden. And for the first time, you're starting to hear Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, actually say things that are not totally bootlicking in nature of Donald Trump. One of the things he says is, he goes, why is Europe, this is what he said today in a speech, why is Europe collectively one of the richest places? Why are we dependent on the United States? That should change. Let's play this clip.
But I always felt that it is strange that a very rich part of the world, Europe is a very rich, maybe the richest part of the world, needs the support of another part of the world to defend itself against the Russians, to the extent it has now, where we are over-reliant on one ally being the United States. And what you will see over the coming years is a more equal, is a shift, a gradual shift, where the Europeans take this bigger responsibility with the United States firmly anchored in the transatlantic relationship.
And then you had Marco Rubio, Donald Trump's Secretary of State, continue to attack NATO and said, why did NATO not help us with our offensive operations in the Strait of Hormuz and in our war in Iran? Well, because NATO is not an offensive alliance. It is a defensive alliance, Rubio. Let's play this clip.
That alliance, what our contributions are. So obviously, one of the things that I've always used, and I've long been an advocate for NATO in my time in the Senate, and one of the arguments I always made was that these bases in the region provided us logistical options that we wouldn't otherwise have. And when some of those bases are denied to you during a conflict that we're involved in, then you question whether that value is still there. So that's going to have to be discussed. There's no doubt about it. I think there's also going to have to be some focus on how, a year after the meeting at The Hague, how much progress has been made in terms of the increased contributions. There are some countries that have doubled their defense spending over the last few years. There are others that are still lagging.
More from Marco Rubio here. He says that we're going to have to address NATO's behavior because he's been saying leading up to this trip that he wants to think about whether the U.S. should even be involved in NATO at all. Play this clip.
Obviously, we're here to set the groundwork for what I think will be probably one of the more important leaders summit in the history of NATO. The president's views, frankly, disappointment at some of our NATO allies and their response to our operations in the Middle East. They're well documented. That will have to be addressed. That won't be solved or addressed today. That's something for the leaders level to discuss. In the meantime, there are other areas where we continue with cooperation. You saw the president's announcement last night with regards to Poland and deployment. That said, obviously the United States continues to have global commitments that it needs to meet in terms of our force deployment.
So then naturally, somebody asks Rubio a basic question. Okay, Rubio, you've got an aircraft carrier by Cuba. You're saying that NATO should be doing more offensive operations. Do you want NATO's help to invade Cuba? Watch what Rubio says.
On that any role for NATO to play when it comes to the situation in Cuba?
NATO's far from Cuba.
I know.
We haven't talked about that at all.
And while the United States is demonstrating that it is this predator nation under a predator criminal regime, this Trump regime, you have Jeff Landry, governor of Louisiana. He's back in the States after that disastrous trip he took to Greenland. And he said the quiet part out loud. He just says it's not even the quiet part anymore with this regime. The reason that Trump wants to conquer Greenland is they want the oil. They realize how bad the Strait of Hormuz is, and the United States wants to turn Greenland, under the Trump regime, into basically a gigantic oil-producing nation, which Greenland, because there's more to life and living than oil and money. I know that's hard for Trump regime and his broligarchs and everybody to understand. Sometimes you want to live in a place with a good environment that's clean, with a high standard of living. It's not all money, 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 oil, 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 oil. And this is what this is all about. What's happening right now is Trump realizes he lost the Strait of Hormuz, checkmate there. So in Trump's view, it's let me conquer an ally and let me seize their oil. And that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to make people so rich. I'm going to make myself I'm going to make myself rich and the Trump organization rich. Here, play this clip.
Wants a deal. Greenland needs the deal. Greenland could be exporting 2 million barrels of oil a day right now. Think about what that would mean. Think about what kind of pressure that would relieve in the Straits of Hormuz. Think about what kind of leverage that would give the Western Hemisphere and America. Think about the help that that would give to Europe right now. And so right now, literally, we could have those barrels on production within 10 months or so. They talked about the mining interests. You talk about rare earths. There's a gallium. They believe there's a gallium find there. Those are things that could help the supply chain in the refineries, in the processes that we have in Louisiana. The president is the only president in the last 30 or 40 years to actually care about doing something and putting Greenland on the map.
And then finally, you had Jason Smith, MAGA Republican Congress member, leadership there. Now that Congress has been shut down because Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House were planning on joining forces with Democrats, at least some of them, to pass a war powers resolution to block Donald Trump's catastrophic and unlawful war in Iran. Refusing to fund Donald Trump's Golden Ballroom and not wanting to give any money to the slush fund and to block the slush fund. Congress is shut down. You have Jason Smith on CNBC. Here's what he told them. Let's play it.
Everyone. But now inflation is higher now than when the president took office.
It is. It did hit the lowest level in 5 years, but ever since the Iran conflict, inflation has ticked up the last couple months. There's no question it's because of the result of the skyrocketing gas prices, which has had a
It was
huge
up
effect.
even before the war, though. Honestly.
But it was right at 2.24, 2.5.
The headline was higher.
Yeah. But can we do better? Joe, absolutely we can do better. We have to, though, have a true balance in spending. If you compare the revenues that come in to GDP, over the last 50 years, it's averaged 17%. So that has been pretty consistent, even with the tax cuts. When you look at the spending, it had always been about 20% of GDP. However, now it's 24 to 25%. It did hit a high as almost 30% during COVID.
There you have it, folks. Let me know what you think. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.